Hello, I'm Brian Harmon, and we are Harmonizing Humanity. And we have our guest here whose name is Grenville Pridham, and he is an attorney, but he's a good attorney. He's one of the 3%, right? Or 1% or whatever. The first thing I'd like to ask you is, why don't you tell our audience about your background, where you're from, your family, whatever, stuff like that.
Okay. I grew up in Illinois, and my father was a government worker. He was a research scientist at a regional laboratory in Peoria, Illinois. So most of my values are Midwestern values, and after high school I then attended the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and then law school at the University of San Diego. And that's what brought me out to California, and I've been here ever since then. So that's my background.
All right, very good. And where do you live now? In Orange County somewhere, I assume?
Now I reside in Orange County.
Okay, very good. Yeah, we lived in Orange for 30 years or so. We loved it, but we like Seal Beach even more.
Seal Beach is nice. Yes.
Yeah, it has a little weather advantage. And well, can you tell us about some of the cases that you've worked on? Just to give us an example or two.
My practice is merely confined to consumer finance law and estate planning. So anything that involves consumer finance and your final affairs, I handle. Some of the current topics that I see a lot of, unfortunately, involve mortgage fraud and foreclosure fraud and investment fraud, particularly against elderly people. With the mortgage fraud and foreclosure fraud, there are individuals right now that prey upon people whose homes are in foreclosure. They make false promises that they can get the people out of foreclosure, get them their homes free and clear, and unfortunately desperate people sometimes believe outrageous lies. And so I've been working on cases involving those issues.
Okay, so those are the general areas that you work in. Can you think of any specific cases that you've worked on that might be especially notable, or any funny stories about your practice? That would be good too. Everybody likes funny, right?
Okay. I'll start with maybe current events. Topical case involving loan modifications for residential home mortgages. President Obama back in 2009 did a bunch of public announcements how they were going to have loan modification programs for persons whose financial situation had become that they couldn't make their mortgage payments anymore. And I actually worked at a law firm briefly in 2009 that did loan modifications, and unfortunately, much to my surprise, I realized that the banks were not giving loan modifications. Maybe 10% of the applications would result in a loan modification. And for me, even more disturbing was the fact that there was no consistency. There was no way to determine whose application would be approved and whose application wouldn't be approved, because you could have two exact same applications, just different names on them, go to two different banks and you get two different results. You could even get two different results within the same bank because the banks had not anticipated the numbers of people who would apply for loan modifications, and so they didn't have the requisite number of call centers in place, and consequently the people that they ended up hiring were generally new employees, untrained employees, and they didn't know anything other than what to read off of their script that would show up on their computer screen. So in that area, I stopped doing the loan modifications, partly because the banks just wouldn't do it, and people obviously would be upset paying for something that they would rarely be able to get a result on. And then also California enacted a law that prohibited advance payments before you work with someone to do a loan modification. So pretty much I was done with the loan modification aspect of the law because of the different changes and the bank's unwillingness to provide loan modifications. And then in 2012, the state of California passed a homeowners Bill of Rights law, which set forth specific procedures that banks had to comply with when they were processing a loan modification. And this law arose out of the fact that the banks were not processing loan applications fairly. They weren't processing them the same within different banks, and there were lots and lots of complaints by consumers about the way their loan modifications were handled. So now we had a set of laws that put standards on the banks as to what they had to do to comply with the Homeowner Bill of Rights law. So, and that, the acronym for that is HBOR, Homeowners Bill of Rights, and people that handle that area a lot, they sometimes just refer to it as the HBOR Act. That's a little side note.
HBOR.
But so since then, I've helped a couple people who have been denied loan modifications unjustly, and the typical scenario was that the bank would tell the applicant, you haven't produced documents, which the applicant had already in fact produced, or the bank would then say the document that you produced aren't sufficient, we need more documents. And so it became this paper chase game where no matter how many documents you would send to your bank, it would never be sufficient, and then you would ultimately be given a letter of denial. So I've represented a few people involving that, and one of my clients told me just yesterday, in fact, that an acquaintance of hers had just been ripped off by another loan mod mortgage fraud person who had charged this acquaintance $50,000 to supposedly pull the man's house out of foreclosure and give him the house free and clear. And unfortunately, that's just not possible. It's not legally possible. It's not factually possible. When you buy a house, if you haven't paid cash for it, you've borrowed the money from some financial institution, and there's no magic bullet for that. The loan modification provides some relief because they can either provide a principal reduction in cases where the home has gone so far under the original market value that they can never sell it as a foreclosure and get their principal amount back, or they can reduce the interest rate, they can extend the length of the term of the loan. But you can't just get your home free and clear for nothing. That's just not reality. So in this particular case, what caught my client's eye, and this is partly because she and I have spoken quite a bit, she was shown a satisfaction of mortgage that this criminal gave this couple to sign, and he had the wife sign the satisfaction of mortgage for their mortgage that they received from some other financial institution, and then they recorded it. So not only is that document invalid because you can't forgive or satisfy a debt of somebody else, you just can't do that, but in recording it, they have committed some crime that I don't know if they'll be prosecuted or not, but they certainly have not done themselves any favor by recording this false document.
Very interesting. Well, as a resident of Leisure World, I could say that that whole thing isn't an issue at all for people who live here, because in order to get in here, they had to pay full cash for the place. So nobody here is looking for a loan modification. Nobody here lost their house due to as far as I know, nobody lost their house due to the decline in the market or any of that stuff.
So none of these homes have mortgages on them?
No, none of them have. Well, there are a few condos that were built in the 70s that have bank financing, but very small percentage, 5% maybe or less.
That, in my opinion, that's actually good because it provides a lot of not satisfaction, but peace of mind to the homeowner. As opposed to a lot of the current financial analysts and investment advisors that I hear on the radio, they talk about leveraging your assets and mortgaging your home and investing that money. Unfortunately, I deal with the clients who've done that and failed, and they do. They lose their homes, and so I'm more in favor of the pay your home off.
Mm-hmm. Right, and if you when you started off, you bought a little house that was a piece of junk, mm-hmm. and maybe eventually moved up to something better, or even if you stayed in that place, when you sell it, you got enough money to move into Leisure World.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's just the people that manage to rent for most of their lives are stuck.
They are stuck, unfortunately.
Yeah. Or if somebody bought their latest house in 2007 or so, they're hurting too. Or if they bought an apartment building then they're sunk. But what people don't seem to understand is that if an individual goes to the bank and says, "I'd like you to modify my loan," the bank is, especially if they're paying their payments every month, the bank has zero reason from their point of view to give you a loan modification.
That's correct.
Because, hey, they're getting money every month. If they give you a loan modification, they'll get less money every month. So, duh, why would they do that?
The short answer is the banks don't. And when this whole loan modification program started around 2009, the bank representatives actually would tell people that you need to stop making your payments before you'll be considered for a loan modification. And that was kind of a dirty secret within the banking industry, because the banks would publicly state that they would never ever tell a client to purposely, intentionally default on a loan. Yet their representatives at these call centers were on a daily basis telling people that they needed to default. And I received I was in those conversations when I would talk to representatives on behalf of clients, where if I had a client who had not yet been in default but was having some financial difficulties, the call center reps would suggest that the client stop making their payments. So it caused a whole lot of problems, and actually two of the most largest banks in the country, they actually got caught. And I don't know if the litigation is still ongoing or if they've settled it by now, but they got caught where they actually had their internal policies where they instructed their call center people how to address applicants, and some of the things that they told people to told their call center employees to lie about. They told call center people to routinely tell an applicant that they had not yet received the package, no matter what. They also told the call center representatives to routinely tell people that they were missing documents, whether that was true. So there was a whole list of this kind of paper chase sort of replies that they trained their representatives to tell. And this all broke open after a couple of call center representatives refused to engage in these lies. And then they ended up either being fired or quit. And somehow they contacted attorneys, or the attorneys on cases found them, and then they eventually declarations. I personally read declarations of about 7 former employees of these 2 major banks that outlined these procedures, which is what I had been personally experienced when I was trying to help people, and it was kind of refreshing to be validated and see that the banks actually were doing it. Because when I would talk to legal counsel or higher up executives at the banks, of course they would always deny these bad procedures, and at that point I didn't have any evidence to substantiate what I was encountering.
Grenville, I understand you used to work in Nevada for the Attorney General's office. Why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Sure. My first job out of law school was working for a district court judge in Nevada, which is a good job to get for any law school graduate out of law school, to go work for a judge. So I worked a year for the judge, and then when you're a law clerk for a judge, law firms get to know you, and ultimately you end up getting lots of job offers. So I ended up staying in Las Vegas more than that first year, and worked 2 years for a law firm, and then I went to the Nevada Attorney General's office, where I was a prosecutor for 11 years. And prosecuted primarily investment crimes and consumer fraud cases while at the Nevada Attorney General's office.
Very good. Can you tell us about some of the cases that you're working on, or cases that you observed while you were there?
Yeah, the primary cases I dealt with involved investment crimes against elderly people, and unfortunately that is still a relevant topic even in 2016. A typical case would involve somebody who would prey upon elderly people who tended to be living alone and who had liquid assets of some kind. And like one of the very first scams I worked on was an insurance agent who went around to people under the guise of selling insurance, and while he was there he would do an interview basically to find out how much in assets they had. And then anyone who had cash in a bank or some sort of liquid asset, he would then revisit. And when he would revisit, he would then tell them about a great investment opportunity, which in that case was an oil well in, I think, Kentucky, which did not exist. So, and the other thing, just for the listeners to know, every single state has an oil and gas division. Texas, it's under the Railway Commission, but every single state has one because of taxation. They keep track of how much oil is pumped in a state because they want to keep taxes, collecting taxes on that. And so all of the victims in these oil and gas well scams could have easily learned that it was bogus from the beginning if they had known to contact that particular state's oil and gas division, because you can find out who owns the well, if it even exists, how much it's pumped, when it's pumped, everything. So anyway, this was a non-existent oil well, and he took 18 elderly people, got approximately 100 to $250,000 was the average amount of money that each victim lost. And the key there is just to do due diligence. You just don't take everything at face value.
Okay, very good. Did you have any exciting cases in Nevada, or did you observe anything there about political corruption or anything like that?
I did. In Nevada, my personal opinion of Nevada is that, and I think it stems from the gaming mentality. Gaming, at least from my perspective, gaming isn't perhaps the most honorable way to make a living. You know, basically taking the money from somebody and making him poor after they lose a game that the odds are in the house's favor to win. So what I observed in California, in Nevada, was that there was a lot of corruption, and because there was like so much of it, people would openly talk about things that in other municipalities most people would probably think, whoa, that is kind of shady. But in Las Vegas, they just didn't have that perception. And so, like, one instance I can recall was there was a state senator who had been years previously convicted of bribery by the federal government in the wiretapped him accepting bribes. And subsequent to that, then the Nevada legislature enacted the two-party consent telephone taping law because they didn't want to be potentially exposed to any more telephone calls as evidence. And years later, I think almost 20 years later, when the state senator died, or shortly before he died, people who were around when he originally been convicted, they changed the name of the state park to his name. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I just thought, like, where else do they name state parks after convicted felons? And no less legislators who take bribes. I mean, probably nowhere else but Las Vegas.
What do you bring from the whole housing crash as an attorney?
Well, what I know from representing clients who were involved in that foreclosure collapse in around 2008 is that some of the clients did lose their jobs, and that's why they ended up being unable to service their mortgages. But a significant number of the clients that came to my office actually should never have received the loans that they obtained. And the other even more bizarre fact that I learned during that whole period was many of those loans, the buyer put zero money down. And what's even more bizarre is some of the buyers not only put nothing down, they received cash out of escrow. And I remember the first client where I realized this, because I would always look at the settlement statement on a foreclosure deal to kind of figure out what's going on. And in this particular case, the house was, let's say, $400,000, but he had $450,000 in loans on the property. And I couldn't figure out what was going on there, and I couldn't find any down payment anywhere. And on the settlement page, it showed that the client received almost $4,000 in cash out of escrow. And initially, I was certain that there was a mistake somewhere on the paper, and that I was missing something. So when the client came in and I went through the settlement statement with him, he informed me that, oh no, it's all accurate, that to buy that house he didn't have to put any money down. The broker, the sales agent had it all arranged. He'd get a first from one bank and a second from a second bank, and then he would get some money out of escrow. And that should never have occurred.
Wow, what a scam!
It was.
You know, I admit that when I was teaching high school in a previous lifetime, I was asked by students, what's the one thing that you could advise us? You know economics, you should have some idea. What's the key to financial success or something? And I told them, buy a house. And I think I might have used the phrase, whatever you have to do, buy a house. But by that I meant, if you have to live in a cruddy little house for the first 5 years of your marriage, what's the downside? You buy a house, you sell it, you buy another house, and then when you retire you get whatever amount, $500,000, $1 million or something like that. As opposed to, and I had this little graph that I drew, where if you rent, you start off here and your rent goes up and up and up and up. But if you buy, you start off a little higher, but then 30 years later the person who's renting is there and the person who's buying is at the same place where your payments are the same place they were when you start with. And that's the best deal ever, right? You pay, if you own a house, you're paying less than the renter that's renting the same house. And
well, you're building equity.
Building equity, right. And but I'm afraid that people took my advice a little wrong and they went in and bought houses. I'm afraid that they might have bought houses they couldn't afford, thinking, well, you know, in the long run it's going to be good, the value's going to go up. And they might have I don't know how many millions of people lost their homes in that whole foreclosure housing thing. But sometimes when I watch a show and they're making a big deal that somebody lost their home in a fire, I think, but 1 million people lost their home in the whole foreclosure deal.
2008.
But we were all responsible. I think we're all guilty. Republicans, Democrats, independents, everybody thought it was great that all the poor people can afford to buy houses. But there was a bank called a bank in Long Beach. I won't give the name of the bank. But they got nasty notes from the Justice Department, U.S. Justice Department, saying, you're not giving enough loans to poor people. And they try to defend themselves, but when the Justice Department is telling you that they're going to investigate and your name is going to be in the headlines, you tend to respond to that. But I don't know if they did give in or if they I don't think they did, but they didn't actually. Maybe the collapse occurred before they could be prosecuted, but
yeah, the creative financing is what is partly responsible for.
Yeah, we got a loan once, and they said, just for your income, just write down there how much money you make each year. You can write anything you want; it doesn't matter.
Well, I had one client who came in, told me he made $40,000 a year, had some ridiculous mortgage, and when I was looking at his application, the application said he made $7,000 a month, which is $84,000 a year. And so I then turned to my client, because at that time I was in Las Vegas and a lot of the casinos had put employees on half-time. And so when he said 40,000, that made sense to me, and so I just asked him, when did they put you on half-time? And he looked at me surprised and said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you said you're only making 40,000. He said, well, right, but I just got a pay raise. I'm making like a little bit more than 40 now. And I said, well, but aren't you working half-time now? And he said, no. And so then I showed him his application page. I said, well, this says you made 84,000 bucks, or made 84,000 when you, and he looked at it and he said, wow, I've never seen that before. And then I said, well, is that your signature? And he looked at the signature and he said, yeah, that looks like my signature. And I asked him, well, how do you explain this? And what he and many other clients in that 2008-2009 period told me was that they had been given blank pages by their loan brokers and instructed just to sign the bottom, and the loan broker stated he or she would fill in the information.
Yeah, take care of the details for them.
And so it's, I mean, the borrower was partly responsible, but I know from personal experience, when you go and do these financial transactions, it's daunting, the number of pages, and particularly if you don't have a law degree, if the loan broker offers to fill in the blanks and help you.
Sure, he should know the right things to put in the blanks.
So, but in that case, the loan broker literally doubled this guy's income to get him approved for the loan, which in hindsight he should never have done because it was more than the guy could afford.
Okay, well that's very interesting, and our time is just about gone here. So maybe you can we could kind of close with how do you feel that you've made the world a better place? Because that's the whole point, right? We're going to try and make the world a better place.
Right, and I guess in that respect, family and friends and love are probably the most important things in life. And in terms of making the world a better place, I guess my real contribution, I believe, is trying to instill in my children to be kind and to be nice to others, and to not be bullies, be nice to people, and pick up trash, and just be good citizens.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
I
appreciate having you on. And this is Brian Harmon, and we're Harmonizing Humanity. Thank you very much.